Everyone who's joining. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. On your screen, you'll see just a little poll that we would love for you to fill out. If you go to menti.com, you can go on your phone or on your computer and type in this code just to get a better sense of who is joining us today. So yeah, we'll just get started in a few minutes, but in the meantime, we'll learn a little bit about where everyone's coming from today. If you're just joining us, we are going to get started in a few minutes, but hopefully you'll see on your screen that we're doing just a little poll to get a better sense of who is joining us today. If you go to menti.com and then type in the code at the top of the screen, you'll be able to just let us know where you're joining from today. We will get started very, very shortly. Okay, great. Thank you so much. It seems like we've kind of reached critical mass, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. We actually just have one other question on our poll. Hopefully, if you refresh your page, just to get a sense of what everyone's policy focus is, just to get to know you guys. Looks like a wide variety of policy focuses. Usually it's supposed to be one of those like word clouds where it gets bigger if more people answer it. It seems like everything is the same size. A lot of diversity and interest today. That's great. Okay, well, thanks so much for participating in that. It's helpful. It's nice to try to get to know you through this Zoom and virtual format. It's hard. I can't see anybody, but at least I know where you're coming from and know what your policy interests are. I am gonna go ahead and get started. Hopefully everyone can see the PowerPoint now, and we'll start diving in. So who we are. So I'm Jessica Cho. I work on the State and Local Innovation Initiative and Labor Sector at JPEL North America. I'm joined today by my colleague, Yiping Li, who also works on the initiative and leads our crime sector. We're also joined by JPEL researcher, Dr. Emily Owens, who's a professor in the Department of Criminology, Law, and Society at the University of California, Irvine. And she is working with a State and Local Innovation Initiative partner, the Shasta County Superior Court, on developing and implementing a randomized evaluation to reduce failures to appear. So really excited to get to hear from her and Yiping. So you'll hear more from them what it's like working with JPEL staff and researchers. First, I'm just going to provide a quick overview of JPEL North America and randomized evaluations, provide some more information on the state and local initiative, and just go over our innovation competition. So just a few notes before we kind of dive in here. Please just ask your questions in the chat throughout the presentation. We'll be compiling them and answer them during the Q&A session at the end. Obviously, during the Q&A, you can also ask more questions, but if you have any that come up, please put them in the chat. I'm also going to be sending around a link tree. Hopefully, let's see, I can send that in the chat right now. That has a lot of great resources that I'll be talking about. It should have every resource that I talk about. Resource. It also has some calendar appointments that you can book with JPEL staff to really talk about the specifics of your, if you have any questions on a policy challenge or randomized evaluations or anything kind of specific. This is definitely a very broad overview, but we're really happy to connect with you more. Great. So we'll just dive in with some background to start. So what is JPEL North America? Maybe some of you know on the call, but just in case, JPEL North America is a research center. We're based in the Department of Economics at MIT. So our mission is broadly to reduce poverty by ensuring policy is informed by scientific evidence. And we do this through a number of activities as illustrated here. We have our research work where we implement randomized evaluations to evaluate social programs to get a measure of impact, determine what's working, what isn't working, and the degree to which programs have an impact. Then we have our policy team, which I'm on, that ensures the results of these evaluations end up in the hands of policymakers and to build partnerships between researchers and policymakers so that we can get more evidence to inform policy, which is really what the point of the innovation competition is. And then finally, we have this capacity building work with researchers and policymakers to help ensure they are better commissioners and consumers of evidence. Yiping will be talking a little bit more about some capacity building work that's offered through the innovation competition, but we also have like a lot of other great work done by that team. So I'm just going to provide a very, very brief overview of what randomized evaluations are. Please ask questions at the end, or if you have specifics about how this could work in program, we're happy to have those conversations. This is definitely not, this is definitely a very high level description of it. But so JPEL focuses specifically on developing and implementing randomized evaluations. And this innovation competition and subsequent TA is really about developing policy relevant randomized evaluations. This certainly doesn't mean that it's the only impact evaluation or it could be the best fit for your program, but randomized evaluations are a great tool to evaluate social programs and really help us understand what would have happened if the program had not taken place. So by comparing the outcomes of a group that receives a program against a group that does not. So the visual here is you have your sample size. One is you're randomly selected to receive the treatment or not receive the treatment. And then that's kind of like, that's a very intervention. I think that there are potential, randomization may happen if there's like limited funding available, limited slots available for a program. I think that potentially you're thinking that there are ethical concerns about providing a program or not providing a program. This is definitely something that we consider a lot and we don't take lightly. So we're happy to talk to you about like the different approaches to randomization and how we can make it the most ethical. Yeah, so by using random assignment to determine who's in each group, the groups don't differ systematically at the outset of the evaluation. So therefore, any difference as represented in this graph that arises between them can be attributed to the program rather than to other factors. So that's once again a very brief overview, but we think they're a really great tool. They're very easier to understand, I think, than other impact evaluations, and really a great tool to evaluate some social programs. So how do we do all this research? We have a network of over 200 affiliated professors at universities around the world who use randomized evaluations to design, test, and improve programs and policies aimed at alleviating poverty. Professor Owens will be talking more about partnering with a researcher, but one of the goals for the innovation competition is to match state and local partners with one of our JPEL researchers to develop and implement a policy relevant randomized evaluation. Great. So I'm going to go into kind of the goals of the state and local initiative. That's the initiative that Yiping and I work on, and that is running the innovation competition. We're housed at JPEL North America. So we have three main goals: to build the capacity of state and local governments to create and use rigorous evidence, share this evidence with other jurisdictions that may be facing similar challenges, practices for feasibly implementing randomized evaluations at the state and local level. So the innovation competition really focuses on this first one to build the capacity to by really working with state and local governments to develop and potentially implement a randomized evaluation. So we've partnered with over 90 jurisdictions to develop policy relevant randomized evaluations and helped implement pilots evaluations across the country. This little map kind of shows like where we have our partners. And I think one of our main ways we get partners is through this innovation competition. So we're excited to talk to you more about this now. So what is the innovation competition? So we request letters of interest from state and local governments on pressing policy questions they're interested in answering through randomized evaluations. You are applying through the innovation competition, applying for project development awards that can include up to a year of pro bono technical support from JPEL staff as you design randomized evaluations. Again, Yiping will talk about this just in a bit. Flexible funding to help get these evaluations off the ground, and connections with JPEL's network of leading academic researchers. Dr. Owens will talk about that in a little bit. I really wanted to focus on a little bit of the process and the timeline, and specifically the policy challenge aspect of the innovation competition. We have a lot of great information on our website, which is is a link provided in the link tree. And I really encourage you to go through the application materials and see everything you need to include. So our application is due April 30th. We request a brief letter of interest that contains a policy challenge, a brief description of the proposed program or policies in question, and any information to help JPEL assess which programs or policies are most suitable for a randomized evaluation. Again, I think that this is like really detailed in all of our resources, but I really want to go over this policy challenge question. I think that it's something that struggled the most with, or have it fully conceptualized. So I always love Venn diagrams. Hopefully this is kind of representative of JPEL's theory of change with the innovation competition. So you have the policy relevant questions on alleviating poverty and or boosting mobility, and that's coming from the state and local governments. And that's really focus of this innovation competition, particularly the first round. We really want, what are those policy challenges? Like, what keeps you up at night? What are you really thinking about in your jurisdiction? And that could be answered by randomized evaluation. And then we have, on the other side, randomized evaluation feasibility and research interest. While we do ask that you think about your interventions and the feasibility of randomization in your letter, it is, I think, like a little less important, and it's something that JPEL staff in the TA that Yiping will talk about, and we can kind of help you get there. And if it ends up, like not being feasible, feasible, or something happens, like that's like less relevant. But we really just like want you to really think about like those policy relevant questions, and really bring those to the table and provide evidence about why this is a problem, and why this is a huge issue in your jurisdiction. Like once again, obviously we focus on randomized evaluation, so that is an important component of it. But in this first round, just like really think about what programs and policy questions you think can be answered by randomized evaluation, and hopefully we can help kind of get you across the finish line. Great. So if you are looking for some examples of policy issues or past evaluations or opportunities to evaluate, we have this really great resource. It's our state and local priority learning agenda. We talked to a ton of jurisdictions and researchers and tried to kind of find that like middle ground that I was talking about in the Venn diagram of those policy relevant randomized evaluations. I think this is a great resource if you're just curious about what other jurisdictions are focused on, or if you're looking for some inspiration, or if you're not quite sure what we mean by policy challenge, or if you're kind of trying to figure that out. I would highly recommend looking at this resource. And it's split up by policy area. So if you're like specifically focused on education, section. But that's for you folks. Also, of course, like, please reach out to JPEL North America staff or about like what your policy challenge and the feasibility of an RCT and all of that. So I mean, we in the letter of interest, we also ask that you talk about the intervention, opportunities for randomized evaluation. These don't have to be necessarily set in stone, but it is helpful to have specific ideas. So when we do walk, we can walk through them and offer changes or modifications or new ideas. Yeah, again, this is all available in our application materials, so highly recommend you check those out. And again, like, we're more than happy to chat with everyone about about like your specific questions. So please like sign up for office hours or send us an email. So this is just kind of an overview of the rest of the timeline. Again, this is all available on our website, so you can refer back to that at any moment, at any time. But it will be, we'll have finalists selected, and then those finalists will kind of go through a technical assistance, and then the finalists will submit full proposals in October. We will select our partners in November, and then the year of technical assistance kicks in November, where we'll hopefully help you develop a randomized evaluation. Great, and now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Yiping, and she's going to talk about working with JPEL staff.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you, Jots, for that introduction to our innovation competition and its timeline. And so before I start, you may be wondering why we have this two-stage process where we ask for a letter of interest and then we give you sort of temporary technical assistance from JPEL staff before we proceed to a full proposal, and why we configured the timeline in such an extended way. So to take a step back and also reiterate what Jess has said, we really see the innovation competition as an opportunity not only to scope and develop one or more high quality randomized evaluations to answer a specific policy question that is highly relevant and of high priority to you and your constituents, but we also see it as a first step in building a long-lasting relationship between you, between your agency, other like-minded state and local governments, and JPEL to promote the use of rigorous evidence in policymaking beyond this one instance. And so we are really not expecting a fully fleshed out randomized evaluation design in the letter of interest. We really want to hear the ideas that excite you and are of high priority to you. And then you can write the letter of interest with an eye toward feasibility, but we will really spend the time during sort of 2 structured periods of technical assistance from JPEL staff to think more about the feasibility aspect and figure out what are all the open questions that needs to be answered and guide you toward a randomized evaluation. And just if you could actually advance for me, I think I've lost access. And so there's 2 periods. So first one is as a finalist, and that would be once you've chosen as a finalist in June to October, you will be working with sort of members of the state and local innovation team. So that would be me, Jess, and Rohit, to identify remaining questions regarding feasibility and begin to answer them. And we really want to spend this time to be fruitful for you. And then in November, as a selected partner, we will match you with an affiliated researcher from our network to answer these remaining questions and develop a randomized evaluation in hopes of submitting a full proposal for more funding from JPEL later. And we will also approach this entire period with an overarching goal of building a community of learning between you and other jurisdictions across the world to really promote the use of evidence, like I've said, beyond this one instance to answer one specific question. And so what does that exactly look like? So as a finalist, we will try to equip you with the best practices in conducting randomized evaluations so you can begin to flesh out more of the feasibility side of the question. And so one of the perks we provide to finalists is a scholarship for 1 or 2 members of your jurisdiction or agency to attend JPEL North America's flagship program evaluating social programs. And this is a course that's usually run in July, and it will be taking place remotely this year due to the pandemic. And you will hear from academics, JPEL staff, and peer government officials and implementing partners on the best practices in impact evaluation, and also help you develop your own plans. And so some of the things you could expect to learn from this evaluating social program could be why or when a rigorous evaluation is needed, the key components to a high quality evaluation, fundamental tools such as needs assessment, logistic frameworks, theory of change, threats and pitfalls to the validity of these experiments, basic tools for data analysis, how to think about what data source to use, and also strategies to maximize policy impact and assess the generalizability of research finding. And so after that course, we will then work with you to apply these lessons and think through feasibility for the specific questions that you've detailed in your letter of interest for us. And this could include, really narrowing down and identifying the data sources to measure outcomes of interest, engaging key stakeholders whose buy-in would be necessary for the success of the project, and anything else that may stand in the way between you and you submitting a proposal for a randomized evaluation later in October. And we also want to note that while developing a randomized evaluation is the primary goal, because that is something that JPEL North America specifically focus on, we also see this as a start of a partnership. And we want you to feel empowered that if we do come to the realization that a randomized evaluation is not possible to address the policy question of your interest, or is not the best path forward, we want this period and what you've learned from evaluating social program to equip you with the tools that make you feel empowered to make that decision. And that we hope that you will feel ready and prepared to really look beyond this one instance, but also take these tools and identify opportunities to incorporate research and evidence into your agency's decision-making and to act on these opportunities in the future. But if you do decide that a randomized evaluation is the right path forward, we would be excited to work with you to help you craft a successful proposal. And at the same time, again, we want to build a community of learning. So some of the things that we will do is sort of put together a workshop before the submission of the full proposal among all of the finalists so that you could each present proposals to each other and get feedback, and also just continue the conversation of what it actually means to use evidence in a local jurisdiction. Because I think you can talk to JPEL staff all the time, but we don't work in government after all, and it might be helpful to hear from peers how they are acting on some of the skills they've learned from evaluating social program. And then after that period, as a selected partner, you will receive up to 1 year of pro bono technical assistance from a dedicated team of JPEL staff. So it will be comprised of more members, and perhaps it won't just be me and Rohit, but we will sort of help you. So one of the goals for the JPEL team that will be helping you will be to build capacity for creating and using evidence even more so. And that could include a variety of activities such as workshops or trainings led by JPEL staff given to members of your agency. And it could be beyond the immediate team that would be working on the proposed randomized evaluation as well. And the second goal is that we will try to connect you with interested researchers from JPEL's network. And the goal here is to develop one or more high quality randomized evaluation for submission to JPEL for full funding at a later stage. So to just clarify, you will be given up to $50,000 in flexible funding for the scoping and development of a randomized evaluation at the end of the innovation competition. And we recognize that the full cost of a randomized evaluation may be more. So we do have other opportunities of funding where you could apply for upward of $250,000 with a JPEL researcher to fund a full randomized evaluation. And JPEL staff during that period will really serve to provide project management support and slowly transition you off to the academic researcher who has the expertise and the resources to answer your question. And so personally, that could look like, for me, when I have been working with selected partners. That could include, looking through memorandums of understanding that needs to be signed, data use agreements, suggestions on language on how to make sure that you will get all of the useful information that you need, but also making sure that there's a smooth transition from you to the researcher so that the two of you can really work together to come up with the best evaluation possible. And now I'll pass it off to Dr. Owens, who can speak more about what that looks like from the perspective of a researcher.
Dr. Owens, are you on the call still?
Muted. Yeah. Hi. All right. Thanks. So I'm going to use a few minutes to talk about what the State and Local Innovation Initiative looks like from my end. So as an invited researcher in JPEL's network, JPEL staff know that I'm broadly interested in criminal justice, and in particular in ways that the criminal justice system can reach better outcomes for low-income or indigent populations. So when this JPEL initiative identifies that, I'm one of the people JPEL might pitch it to. So my own point of entry into the state and local innovation competition is learning from JPEL about a practitioner's policy challenge in a project that's received this initial funding. So in the case of the Shasta County Superior Court, which is a project I'm working on right now, it was that the court was really concerned about the high rate at which people accused of misdemeanors were failing to appear for court dates. And this was an even bigger problem for people who are potentially homeless. These failures to appear really ratchet up criminal justice consequences for individuals. And what starts out, and if you miss a court date, can suddenly involve a very serious financial sanction or even jail time, and no one wins here. So the court had a number of ideas of ways they could try to reduce failures to appear, including providing transportation, partnering with other agencies, like the local police or a health service provider, just to try to help to encourage people experiencing housing instability in particular to show up in court. And so after hearing what the court was interested in doing and the court's ideas, my role is really similar to like a curator of these ideas along a few specific dimensions. First is to think about how the very practical goals of the court overlap with the boundaries of social science knowledge. So what I would think about is, how much evidence is there on effective strategies to reduce failures to appear? And how much daylight is there between, the court's specific context and where science has really pinned down what works? In the case of Shasta County, there's really a growing body of evidence that simple text message reminders can generate non-trivial reductions in FTAs, but these studies have been in big cities and among higher income populations. People who look like they may be experiencing housing instability have been explicitly excluded from existing research. And to me, this absence of evidence on how a tested strategy might work in a vulnerable and hard to reach urban population, or less urban population, was a real gap in science. The second thing I looked at was what the court's proposed strategies were. And what I was looking for among the multiple ideas proposed by the court were things that mapped on to broader social science questions or hypotheses. So again, in the specific case of Shasta County, one that jumped out at me was the potential to involve outside parties to help remind people of their court dates. This struck me as a potential test of an idea being batted around in sociology right now about how people respond to the expansion of the criminal justice system. In particular, this is a hypothesis called system avoidance, which is that people start avoiding all official institutions like hospitals or banks in order to avoid police contact. There's been some qualitative studies of this, but the idea of seeing if people actually start withdrawing from record-keeping organizations that appear to be cooperating with the court seems like something that would be really important for people to know, both academics and practitioners. So the third thing I then thought about was also more feasibility, as Yiping has discussed, based on my own research experience, what would have to be true for some of these ideas that the court had that I identified as also being like really important for science to be credibly tested. So the next long step is setting up the potential experiment that really sort of both meets the court's needs and also really has this big scientific impact. And here JPEL staff coordinated, regular check-ins with myself and the practitioner, and provided a lot of research support, like sort of collecting relevant literature, reaching out to the JPEL network of vendors that could help implement the experiment, and to other academics who'd worked on an issue that the court and I were sort of thinking through. JPEL staff was also there to provide technical feedback. They've seen many informative and uninformative experiments, and can point out, specific places where we could shore up our implementation plan. So JPEL, the court, and I all have the same goal at this point, which is to set up an experiment that will generate the right data to solve the math problem that will provide the best possible answer to the practitioner's question. For Shasta County right now, we're actually about to launch a test of one of the basic assumptions in the existing research on failures to appear. Before we even start to involve third parties, we want to know, is it really much harder to reach people experiencing housing instability by text message? Everyone sort of assumed that you can't text people who are homeless, but we don't actually know if that's true or not. So since I just mentioned everyone's goals, it's I think a good time to talk about what I, as a researcher, get out of collaborations like these. Some of these are intrinsic. I have my job because I like trying to figure out policies better for people. So research for me is very similar to a language translation problem. So, you want to turn people's actions and experiences into a mathematical relationship, play around with that equation, and then retranslate that math into something that's actionable in the real world. So in my experience, I found that this is just a much richer thing when the people who are doing the policy are interested and involved. About what outcomes are important and how a policy is actually implemented, and how these interactions are or could be measured in a way that lends itself to mathematical analysis. And when a particularly relevant type of data isn't currently collected by that practitioner, they or JPEL frequently have existing relationships with the organizations who do keep track of a particular outcome. The local partner is really the sort of on-the-ground expert who can quickly screen out who might be a helpful or unhelpful partner. Another way in which the institutional partners make good research easier is along ethical grounds, actually. So as a faculty member at the University of California, Irvine, I can't just go out and experiment with people's lives. I'm bound by the ethical rules and guidelines established by UCI's Institutional Review Board, or IRB. And that's a body that makes sure that I'm conducting research in a way that respects the rights and welfare of human subjects. Since practitioners, your communities, you are really crucial partners in identifying and mitigating risks that the research might pose. Here is also where the idea that I'm like trying to curate practitioner ideas is really relevant. IRB limits what I can do, but not what you can do. Because practitioners have already sort of formally pitched their ideas in the early rounds of the JPEL competition, the point at which I begin to help shape the research question is very, very clear. And that makes it very easy for my IRB to come in and provide ethical guidance for what my actions are going to be. So the last highlight for me about working with the state and local innovation initiative is the opportunity to really contextualize the results of an experiment. So this is where, again, we get back to, I've done some math. How do we translate that math back into something that has real world meaning? And at key points in the experiment process, we have the opportunity to talk together about what the math is showing, and to see if we're measuring what we think we are when we start trying to take the results of this RCT and turn it back into really actionable policy recommendations. All right. And those were the ideas I wanted to hit. So I think at this point, are we going to open it up for questions?
Yes.
All right.
We are. Thank you so much. That was great. Okay, yeah, just a reminder, if you have any questions for us, please feel free to put them in the chat. We will start answering them. I think Yiping can take this first one. So we had a question about funding. So aside from technical assistance, what is the funding meant to cover for the randomized evaluation?
Yeah, so I believe that this is sort of addressing the $50,000 that you'll be awarded as a selected partner, but please do correct me if I'm misunderstanding the question. So the $50,000 of flexible funding is actually separate from the technical assistance you'll receive from JPEL. The technical assistance from JPEL is pro bono for up to a year, and the $50,000 can go toward anything, any activity that you think is necessary for the scoping and development of a randomized evaluation. So for some example, some agencies have used it for salary time to appoint a specific project manager to run this program, and then another jurisdiction has used the money to enter into a contract with an IT firm to really revamp their database so that they could collect key outcomes of interest or to update it so that it is accessible for data analysis. So it could be used in a variety of ways, and we are definitely happy to brainstorm with you during the technical assistance from June to October to make sure that you are aware of what this money can be spent on and how it can be most helpful for you in developing a randomized evaluation.
Thanks. Okay, we just got a message. Can you share where in the process we would determine a solution to test? Should we arrive with a problem but no solution and get help from the academic partner, or could we arrive with a potential solution and get help figuring out how to test it? I think this is a great question and definitely one we grapple with in the innovation competition. I can say that I think it's easier to kind of come with, it's easier to come with a problem and then have some general ideas about a solution or intervention to test it. If you have kind of a program or idea, and then you're trying to kind of like back into a question, it can get like a little more complicated. It's definitely still doable, but I think that would be my take on it. I would love to hear also from Dr. Owens, as a researcher, if you can, and experience working with a partner, what your thoughts on this are.
Yeah, so I come from I used to be a basketball player, but the sort of, Michael Jordan made the most baskets. He also missed the most baskets. I think, obviously the most important thing is to have a policy problem, what's keeping you up at night, as Jessica referenced. Something that would be helpful for me, or what really worked with Shasta County, was that they had just a lot of ideas. Not that, here are, I think, 4 or 5 potential things that we think might be helpful. And then I could look at those ideas and say, all right, well, what do I know about sort of the social science evidence on these ideas? Are there any of these ideas that I think, based on my reading of the academic literature, 1, could work, and 2, also have a lot of, bang for the buck in terms of really, again, having like a much bigger impact. So I think having, these ideas don't necessarily need to be fleshed out, but just almost, what do you guys think might work? And if you have more than one, that's, more things for me to take a look at and try to also help kind of work through and see what I think from a scientific perspective might really help. So it doesn't need to be like one clear-cut, well-developed thing, but, potentially many hunches or potential relationships or things that you think from where you stand, could possibly work. Let's see. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes, we have an additional question in the chat about how fleshed out does an idea have to be? Can there be multiple ideas included in the LOI? So the idea doesn't, as I said, kind of in that Venn diagram example, we in this first round, we really want to work with state and local governments to flesh out those ideas more. So you can have these pressing policy challenges and say, here's an issue that my jurisdiction is dealing with. Here are some ideas we have for interventions, but we're not quite there. We can work from that. And there can be multiple ideas. So you can include just kind of a list of a lot of policy questions, and we can help you kind of narrow that down to whichever is most feasible with to get to an RCT and talk to researchers as well to see what their research interest is. But yeah, definitely feel free to include multiple policy questions, and don't think, I don't think that everything has to be, things don't have to be fully fleshed out. You don't have to hand us like a perfect like program or intervention or policy question and like that's it. It's definitely an iterative process, and we think that, you know, our value add as JPEL can really help you get those things fleshed out more. So I think that it can really run the gamut. You know, that being said, at a point, you know, if you're like, I have it all figured it out, like, sure, but we do not require it in any way. Great. We also had a question. Do researchers intend to publish the results of the randomized evaluations? So yes, when we get to the point of implementing a randomized evaluation, we do, one of the like requirements is that we do ask that researchers publish the results and submit it to a peer-reviewed journal. I don't know, Emily, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's how we, you know, move science forward, right? Is getting people to learn what the outcome of the experiment was, you know, and then other practitioners can then, you know, also know, okay, in this context, you know, here is some evidence on what works and might not work. Also, if the experiment is well designed and it doesn't look like an intervention actually worked, that also is a very informative piece of knowledge. Yeah, so the publication process is important for sort of forming this knowledge community, right? And using the experience of your jurisdiction to help inform others.
Yeah. Great. So we have a question. Oh, sorry, Ethan, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think we also have a question about whether we prefer or require applicants to demonstrate broad stakeholder support across multiple agencies or governments, and if successful applications tend to have broad buy-in. So, and then I guess I can take a first stab, and Justin, Dr. Owens, please feel free to jump in. I think for the letter of interest, we're not really asking you to get secure buy-in from every single agency whose buy-in may be required for a successful randomized evaluation. I think we would like you to consider what agencies you might need to partner with beyond your own, and really have an idea of perhaps, you know, who you might speak to. And then once you are selected as a finalist, JPEL staff will hopefully work with you to really identify these key agencies, how involved they need to be, whether they do need to submit a letter of support. So we do require a letter of support for a full proposal from agencies that you'll be partnered with, or at least the main agency that will be running the randomized evaluation, just to indicate that someone at the agency is aware and that will allow this project to go on. But we definitely don't require you to secure all of that buy-in right now to support the letter of interest. We hope to work with you in partnership to secure the buy-in. And then as well, I think when an academic is on board, that's also something that you could work together on as well. But Dr. Owens, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, by the time that I put together like the sort of second proposal for bigger funding to do the experiment, at that point, I know I would not be comfortable moving forward until everyone who we needed data or participation from had, you know, signed a letter saying, I know this is happening, I intend to cooperate. So that was part of the sort of very long experimental setup, was really securing sort of commitments from partners who we thought we needed for the experiment to be feasible. So,
yeah, I think we also have a question about, I lost it in the chat, but what if outcomes take 3 to 5 years to be observed? I think this is a very typical, you know, for a longer research project, and it's definitely something that we have had before. You know, these evaluations take, you know, a long time, and you won't at points get results for a few years. I don't know if that question was like if that's like a barrier to implementing or developing a randomized evaluation, but from my perspective, I don't see it as a barrier. I'd love to hear from Dr. Owens and Yiping if you have also any follow-ups.
I think hopefully I'm getting this right. Perhaps there's a sort of concern that we only provide the pro bono technical assistance for a year, and that's sort of what happens when the outcome takes 3 to 5 years to be observed. And I just want to emphasize that the technical assistance is really trying to help you to put together a full proposal, and then you will have we have funding opportunities at JPEL where you can submit that full proposal, which is what Dr. Owens have done with Shasta County, for a longer grant period to run that randomized evaluation. So if the concern is, will JPEL then no longer support this project after a year because that's when our pro bono technical assistance ends, that is absolutely not the case. We actually really hope to get you set up and match with the researchers so that you would have support for years to come on this project and the funding to do it from JPEL.
So I would also add, depending on the context, that might be, looking at longer run outcomes might itself be something that is sort of a fundamental innovation in science. So, recently I was doing this National Academy of Sciences thing, sort of figuring out what do we know about proactive policing. And one of the issues that we identified was that there's a lot of really well done randomized controlled trials of policing policies, but they look at crime outcomes over very short time periods, 6 months after this intervention. And there actually is not a lot of very sort of long run evaluations of different policing policies. Where, okay, it looks like things change very quickly, but what are the true long-term outcomes? So again, if that's really, that could actually be a positive if there's a lot of knowledge about sort of short run effects of a particular policy, but we think that long run outcomes are important. And, we've never tried to look at that timeline. That might be a really relevant and important and exciting question. And then we need to figure out the feasibility of that. How do we track people for multiple years? So that's where the researcher also might come in and actually be really attracted to that idea and want to try to figure out how to make that happen. I think this is related a little bit actually to, let's see, Lindsay Mazur's question about a baseline number of people who need to be part of the experiment. That's a question of what's called a power analysis, is me using my mathematical language again. It depends on the effect size, how big of an effect do we think this RCT might have, or conversely, how small of a behavioral change would we want to start thinking is maybe zero. And this would be something that, the academic partner would work with you with, because this is really like a statistical question that varies based on the specific context in which you're working. Yeah, so having an idea in the initial proposal of about how many people you think could be impacted by this program, something that I would look at. And I think JPEL would also probably talk about this in the initial development as well. But that's a mathematical question that depends on the context that the academic would know how to do.
We have a question about, will this webinar be available for individuals who are interested but not able to participate today? Yes, we are recording the webinar, and we will post it as soon as we can get the captions on it. So hopefully by the end of the week, but we will send around the recording to everyone who registered. So feel free to send it to colleagues that you may be interested in or anyone in your networks. I have also gotten a comment that the link tree maybe is not showing up for you. So I'm just going to send a link to our office hours in the chat. So if you need to sign up for those, you can do that without going to the link tree. Yeah, so hopefully you can, we're trying to have people sign up for appointments, but let me know if this doesn't work for you. And obviously you can email us as well. I'm going to send everyone's email in the chat. Yiping, I think we've answered all the questions in the chat. Is that right?
I think so too. And I just popped in our email address, so
okay,
you don't have to do that.
Yep. Great. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining everyone today. Please get in touch with us either via email or through office hours. We learn about your policy challenges and help you think about the feasibility of a randomized evaluation. Please feel free to reach out with any questions. Big thanks to Dr. Owens for joining us today. It's very early on the West Coast, so we appreciate that. And thank you to Yiping for joining me as a panelist today. Great. That's it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.